The studio lights shimmered over the glossy desk of The View, but something in the air felt wrong-charged, like the quiet seconds before a thunderclap. The audience was lively, but a few crew members whispered behind the cameras, exchanging glances. They felt it too. It was supposed to be a light segment, just a wholesome celebrity spot. But what they didn't realize was that two tectonic plates of American culture were about to collide, and the fault line ran straight through stage center. Coming back from break in 3, 2. The theme music faded. The applause sign flicked on. Whoopi Goldberg smiled at the camera. Business as usual. Our next guest needs no introduction. He's an action star, martial artist, and philanthropist who's been working tirelessly to support our nation's veterans. Please welcome Chuck Norris. Applause erupted as Chuck walked in with that unmistakable, slow, steady gait. Black suit, calm eyes, a nod that carried decades of discipline. He shook Whoopi's hand, then Sunny's, then Anna's, and paused when he got to Joy Behar. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not even close, Chuck, she said, standing up for a second too long, her grip lingering a beat past comfortable. This should be fun. That was the first warning shot. Chuck simply smiled and sat down. The segment opened normally. Chuck talked about his work with veterans suffering from PTSD, how his foundation was building transitional housing, supporting job placement, funding therapy. Whoopi nodded along. Sunny clapped at one point. Anna asked thoughtful questions. But Joy sat back in her chair, legs crossed, scribbling notes, waiting, sharpening dot. Millions of viewers leaned forward. They could feel it building. The same way you can sense a dogfight behind a closed door. Then she pounced. So, Chuck Joy said, flipping a card over like it was a poker table. All this talk about helping veterans, do you ever feel conflicted? You know about glorifying violence for decades and then suddenly trying to clean it up with charity? The air cracked like a snapped wire. Chuck's brow twitched just slightly. He turned to her slowly. I've never glorified violence, Joy, he said evenly. I've glorified standing up for what's right. There's a difference. Joy's smile grew. It was a smile made of teeth. Oh, come on, Chuck. Walker, Texas Ranger. You solved problems with spin kicks and revolvers every week. Now, you want us to believe you're Captain Compassion? The audience tensed. A few scattered murmurs. One person laughed nervously. Chuck leaned forward, voice still low. Every episode of that show ended with justice, with dignity, with someone being protected. I never said strength replaces empathy. But sometimes, strength is required to protect empathy. Sure, Joy snorted. Or maybe it was just fun to throw people through glass tables. Whoopi cut in, clearly trying to pull the wheel back. Let's maybe talk about the foundation. But Joy didn't stop. You've spent your whole career playing a man who settles things with violence. And now you're sitting here telling young men to be sensitive, to get help? Don't you think that's just a little hypocritical? Chuck's eyes narrowed. What I'm telling young men, he said, tone tightening, is that strength is nothing without restraint. That self-control is more powerful than a fist. You want to attack my message because it doesn't fit your narrative, but the truth is, I've walked a walk. Joy shook her head with theatrical disbelief. You've walked the red carpet, and now you want a medal for building a few houses for veterans. I've been advocating for civil rights before you were selling protein shakes. Chuck didn't blink. I didn't come here for a medal. I came here because I care, because I've buried friends, because I've seen what war does to people. You want to make this about politics? Be my guest. But I came to talk about healing. The audience went silent. Joy leaned forward, lips pressed, tight. Healing doesn't come from pretending your past doesn't matter, and it doesn't come from tearing people down who are trying to help, Chuck shot back. For a split second, everything stopped. The tension was so thick the stage could have shattered under it. Joy stood up. You think you're helping? You're playing savior for an audience who's been sold lies about strength their whole lives. You've helped create a generation of men who think emotion is weakness. You think you can undo that with a check and a speech? Chuck rose to, not fast, not threatening, but deliberate, unmovable. I've taught discipline, honor, sacrifice. The men I've worked with real veterans, not studio tough guys. They don't see me as a contradiction. They see me as someone who shows up when it counts. Oh, please, Joy scoffed. You're selling a legacy. You came here for one reason, to fix your image. You're not here for the veterans. You're here for yourself, the studio murmurs. Turned louder now, a couple of gasps. One of the stage managers looked toward security. Chuck's voice dropped to a deep, deadly calm. You don't know me, Joy. You don't know what I've seen. And you don't get to tell me what my intentions are. Joy took a step forward, finger pointed. I know enough. I know a bully when I see one. And I know when a man walks in here trying to lecture women on morality, he better be ready for the same scrutiny. Chuck stepped in closer, their faces now inches apart. The audience was holding its collective breath. You invited me here to talk about helping people. If you wanted to fight, you should have been honest. But I won't be bullied, not by you, not by anyone. And I won't be silenced, Joy said, her voice cracking slightly. Not by some ex-action star playing humble now that the box office dried up. Whoopi stood up, her voice strained but firm. Okay, we're going to commercial. But Chuck spoke over her. Then let's be clear, he said, facing the camera now. To the veterans out there watching, this is for you. No matter what noise gets thrown at you, no matter who tries to shout louder, you matter. Your struggle matters. And I won't stop speaking up for you. Applause burst out, hesitant at first, then growing. Some audience members stood. Joy looked around, stunned. You really going to spin this into a hero moment? She hissed. Chuck looked at her one last time. I'm not spinning anything. You just didn't expect me to stand my ground. The camera panned out. Joy's jaw tightened. Chuck didn't flinch. The lights dimmed slightly as producers scrambled off stage. A firestorm was brewing, but neither of them blinked. Before the next segment rolled, Chuck turned to the camera once more. If this matters to you, if truth matters, share it. Talk about it. Don't let it get lost in the noise, because the real fight, it isn't about who yells the loudest. It's about who keeps standing. Then he turned back to Joy, and the fire was only just beginning. Whoopi's voice cut through the tension like a blade dull from overuse. All right, we're cutting to a break. But the audience wasn't listening. Nobody was. Not the producers, scrambling off stage, not the stagehands frozen mid-step with cue cards in their hands, and certainly not Joy Behar, who hadn't moved from her spot. Staring Chuck down like a prosecutor delivering the final blow, Chuck remained standing. Calm, composed, but there was something different now, a crack in the porcelain resolve. His jaw was clenched tight enough to splinter teeth, and his hands, though still by his side, were curled just slightly into fists. Joy leaned forward, her voice low enough to be picked up by only the closest microphones. You really think you walked in here and saved face? You look ridiculous. Chuck didn't answer immediately. He turned his head just enough to glance at the audience, some whispering, others wide-eyed, a few already taking out their phones, capturing the moment before it disappeared into post-production purgatory. I didn't come here to save face, he replied, tone soft but loaded. I came here to make sure the people who don't get airtime, the veterans struggling to stay alive, were heard for once. Joy's smirk faltered, just for a second, but Chuck noticed. And you, he continued, voice rising just enough to drift back into live microphones. You made it about ego, about politics, about scoring points in a room that was supposed to be about healing. I made it about accountability, Joy snapped. Sorry if that doesn't fit your old-school cowboy playbook. At that, Chuck finally stepped away from his chair, slowly, and moved to center stage, right between the panel and the audience. The studio lights caught him at just the right angle, his silhouette cast on the floor like a statue from another time. This isn't about cowboys, he said, looking directly into the camera now. This is about respect, for sacrifice, for pain, for service. And if you can't put your politics aside long enough to have that conversation, then maybe you're the one who's outdated, murmurs from the audience. One woman clapped, then another. A soft tide of support was rolling in. Joy turned her head slightly, glaring at the control booth. Are we really still live? No, someone called back, uncertain. Sort of. The feeds delayed. Sarah N., sitting stiffly at the far end of the desk, finally spoke. Guys, maybe we all just take a breath. But no one did, because Joy wasn't done. She stood up now, to her voice louder, her stance defiant. You don't get to walk onto the view, Chuck, and pretend you're some moral compass. You played a glorified vigilante for 30 years. You punched your way through every storyline. And now you want to preach about empathy and self-restraint? You made your millions, selling the exact opposite. Chuck turned back slowly, the corners of his mouth tight. I lived my life outside of Hollywood to Joy. I trained with real warriors. I sat with mothers at their sons' funerals. I've cried in VA hospitals. What have you done? Oh, please, Joy scoffed. Don't try to guilt-trip me with war stories like you're the only person who's ever cared. I'm not guilt-tripping anyone, Chuck replied. I'm asking you to listen. You invited me here, you put my name on the screen, and the second I walked through that door, you had your knives ready. I had questions ready, she said coldly. Sorry if they were sharper than your usual fluff interviews. No, you had an ambush ready, Chuck shot back, stepping toward her. You wanted to dismantle me on live television because it gets views? You don't care about veterans. You care about headlines. Excuse me. Joy's eyes narrowed. I've spent my entire career talking, Chuck cut in, always talking. But where were you when those VA bills were being slashed? Where were you when suicide rates among former service members spiked last year? You weren't covering that. You were talking about who got kicked off Dancing with the Stars. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Chuck didn't let her. You want to paint me as a relic? Fine. But you've been sitting behind that desk, sneering at the world, pretending that sarcasm is activism. It's not. The audience broke into applause, now bigger this time, sustained. Joy's nostrils flared. You think applause means you're right? I think it means I'm not the only one tired of empty outrage passing for moral authority. Then, she did something unexpected. Joy stepped around the desk and moved closer, not with aggression, but with something almost dangerous in its confidence. Like a predator circling prey she didn't quite believe was dangerous. You know what, Chuck? She said, quieter now but still clear. You're not here for the veterans. You're here because the public forgot you, and you need to be remembered. Chuck didn't blink. I'm fine being forgotten, as long as the people I fight for aren't. That line landed like a hammer. The studio echoed with the weight of it. Joy's mouth tightened to a thin line. And then, without warning, someone from the audience shouted, "Let him speak!" The room shifted. The balance of power was tipping. Chuck saw it. So did Joy. Whoopi stood, clapping her hands loudly. All right, everybody, let's get back on track. This is not what we brought Chuck here for, but Joy waved her off. No, Whoopi, if he wants to moralize, let's finish it. She turned to Chuck again. Let's talk politics. You supported lawmakers who actively voted against healthcare expansions for veterans. Don't act like you're bipartisan just because you put a sticker on your website. Chuck's expression hardened. I've worked with organizations on both sides. I don't check voting records before I fund a clinic. You want to politicize everything? Fine. But I'm too busy doing the work while you argue over sound bites. Joy leaned in, eyes gleaming. Is that what this is to you? Sound bites? Is that why you said on that podcast last year that Hollywood can go to hell? Chuck's eyes flashed. You dug up that interview. You said it. Or were you just acting tough again? Chuck took one step forward, then another until they were practically face to face. I said it, he confirmed, and I meant it, because while you people were busy selling outrage, I was burying friends. I don't have time for Hollywood's fake tears, or yours. Joy stared into his eyes and blinked just once. The audience felt it, like watching a boxer wobble for half a second. Then Joy recovered. You really want to go there? Chuck didn't answer, because right then, right as Joy opened her mouth against someone else, stood up from the audience. It was a man, mid-40s, wearing a black cap with a military insignia, voice steady, loud. You may not agree with his movies, he called out, but I'm standing here today because of Chuck Norris. His foundation paid for my rehab, and he never once asked for credit. A murmur surged like a wave through the crowd. Joy froze. Chuck turned to the man, nodding with quiet gratitude. That's why I'm here, he said softly. Not for a fight. For that, security moved toward, raised a hand, let him speak. Joy looked like she might explode. Are we seriously turning this into a testimonial hour? But the audience wasn't listening anymore. They were clapping, louder now, long and rising. Joy spun toward the producers. Cut his mic, she ordered. The room went silent. Chuck's voice rang out again. Sharp, clear, final. No need. I've said what I came to say." He took one step back toward the panel table, and, "If speaking truth makes people uncomfortable, good." Then he sat down again, calm, composed, but his eyes locked on Joy's, no longer avoiding, no longer absorbing. This was no longer an interview. This was a war of principles, and it was far from over. The clapping lingered, not thunderous, not overwhelming, just enough to sting. Joy Behar sat motionless in her chair, a rigid smile frozen on her face as though it had been pasted on by a trembling makeup artist. Her eyes flickered toward the audience, then to the camera, then back to Chuck. He had returned to his seat with the unshakable calm of a man who knew something irreversible had happened. Whoopi's voice came again, measured, weary. "Can we just—" Everyone breathed. But the oxygen in the room had changed. It wasn't just TV anymore. Joy leaned forward slowly, her tone now icier, more surgical. "You know what, Chuck? Let's stop pretending this is about veterans. This is about you using them as a shield to protect your image." The audience murmured uneasily. Chuck didn't move. He didn't blink. But his tone dropped into something so deliberate it made the hairs on the back of people's necks stand. "You don't get to say that." "Oh, don't I?" Joy countered, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You walk in here, draped in patriotism, using war stories like currency. You want people to forget the decades of macho nonsense and see you as the grand old savior." "I am no one's savior," Chuck said, flatly, "but I am someone who shows up." Joy snapped her fingers in the air. "Shows up on cue when a camera's on? You know what you are. You're Hollywood's version of a hero. Violent, and now you're offended that someone finally called you on it. You're twisting everything," Chuck said, his voice rising now for the first time. "You act like my life is a script, like none of it is real. But the funerals were real. Joy, the hospitals were real. The men missing limbs, real. The PTSD, real." "I know it's real," she fired back, "and that's exactly why I'm sick of people like you using it as branding." That landed like a slap, gasps in the audience. Anna Navarro dropped her. Pen Whoopi let out a long breath that sounded like defeat. Chuck leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on Joy's. "I've bled for people who can't fight for themselves." "What have you done?" shouted from a desk, scolded from a pedestal, thrown rhetorical grenades at people trying to do the work. Joy's face flushed red. "I've spoken truth to power." "No," Chuck cut her off, his voice like a blade across silk. "You've mocked power. That's not the same thing. And now you're just mad that the punchline punched back." The audience erupted in surprised applause again. Louder this time, Joy stood. "No," she snapped. "Don't you dare clap. For that, you're not going to sit there and gaslight me on my show." "Gaslight?" Chuck repeated, eyebrows raised. "That word used to mean something. Now it just means someone said something you don't like." She stepped from behind the table again. Her voice dropped into something colder, more dangerous. "You're not used to women talking back, are you?" That line pulled every muscle in the room tight. Chuck's nostrils flared, not enraged, but in restraint. A visible, deliberate effort not to take the bait. "You want to make this about gender now?" he said, quiet but deadly. "Fine, let's go there. You think I don't respect strong women. I was raised by one, married to one, trained hundreds of them, fought beside them. You don't get to pull that card just because you lost an argument." Joy's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He wasn't done. "This isn't about you being a woman. This is about you being disrespectful." Silence. Then suddenly Sarah N. jumped in, desperate to break the tension. "Maybe we pivot. Chuck, could you tell us more about that mentorship program for veterans?" But Joy wheeled on her. "Don't you dare try to smooth this over," she snapped, eyes blazing. "He came here to polish his halo on national television. Let's let him finish." Chuck stood up again, slowly. "Careful," he said quietly. "You're starting to confuse confrontation with cruelty." Joy stepped closer. Too close. "And you're the moral compass now. The guy who made a fortune breaking noses on screen is suddenly a therapist." Chuck's eyes flashed. "You know what violence is?" he asked. "It's not the roundhouse kicks. It's not the action sequences. It's this right here. A person who brings someone into their house just to humiliate them. That's what Real damage looks like the studio froze. Is that what this is to you? Joy whispered. Damage control? Chuck took a step closer, voice like thunder wrapped in silk. No, this is damage containment. Because if I let myself say what I really think about you, I'd be no better than the image you've created in your head. A single voice from the audience yelled, "Then say it." Chuck exhaled. His voice dropped to a growl focused, final. You're not interested in truth. You're interested in drama. You don't care what I say. You had your story written before I walked in. You were just waiting for your cue to attack. Joy said nothing, so Chuck kept going. You want to talk about hypocrisy? Let's talk. I've never hidden who I am. My flaws, my beliefs, my history, it's all out there. But you hide behind your righteousness. You think that being loud equals being right. It doesn't. The audience began to clap again, but this time it wasn't supportive applause. It was reverent, hesitant. People unsure of whether they were witnessing television history or emotional disaster. Joy's lips trembled only slightly. But Chuck caught it, the first fracture in her steel facade. I've made mistakes, Chuck admitted, looking at her squarely. But I've also spent decades fixing them, quietly, consistently. You say I'm here to sell an image? No, I'm here to undo one. I'm here to stop the next generation from thinking strength means silence, that masculinity means isolation, that emotion means weakness. He paused. And in the dead silence that followed, his voice lowered even further now, just between the two of them. You don't get to decide what redemption looks like, especially not when you've never had to earn any. Joy's breath caught then. She stepped back. Just one step. And in that moment, for the first time all morning, Joy Behar looked unsure. But before she could strike back, the studio doors creaked open behind them. A voice from the hallway shouted, "We've got reporters outside. CNN's online too. Twitter's already trending." Producers scrambled toward the stage, whispers buzzing through their headsets like static. But Chuck didn't move. He turned to Joy one last time. This could have been a conversation. You turned it into a courtroom. And I don't need to be judged by you. And then he walked not toward the cameras, not toward the dressing room, toward the back of the studio, past the lights, past the whispering interns, toward the shadows where the attention didn't follow. And for once, Joy Behar stood there alone. No retort, no punchline, just a room full of people wondering what had just happened and what would happen next. The door behind Chuck hadn't fully closed. It swayed slightly on its hinges open, just enough to show the dim hallway where producers scrambled, still trying to make sense of the bomb that had just detonated live on national television. Back on set, no one said a word. Joy Behar stood motionless, her chest rising and falling beneath the studio lights like a pressure cooker at the edge of eruption. Her notes were scattered across the desk, pages curling at the corners from the heat. Of the cameras, or something more human. She didn't speak. Not yet. But when she did, it wasn't sharp. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't even angry. It was quiet, dangerous, controlled. You want to walk away from this, Chuck? Fine. Her voice echoed down the corridor. Cameras were still rolling, and now the control booth, so often the unseen heartbeat of the view, was frozen, uncertain whether to cut to commercial or let it roll. Chuck stopped halfway down the hall. He didn't turn around, so Joy kept going. But you don't get to walk away from accountability, she called after him. You don't get to drop platitudes and emotional anecdotes and call that justice. You don't get to turn pain into branding and then claim moral high ground. He slowly pivoted his body, framed by the hallway's edge, the blue glow of the emergency exit light casting long shadows behind him, and then he walked back in. Deliberately, each footstep was audible. The studio was that quiet. When he reached center stage, he didn't take his seat. He stood, right in front of Joy. Not towering over her, not aggressive, just steady. I came here, Chuck said, voice raw with sincerity, to talk about saving lives. You turned it into a referendum on mine. Joy crossed her arms, but the defensiveness wasn't solid anymore. It was fraying. I challenged you, she said. That's my job. No, Chuck replied softly. Your job is to listen, to ask, to understand. Challenging isn't the same as condemning. Joy's gaze wavered. You think I haven't lost people too? Chuck blinked. Something in his face shifted. Then why attack someone who's trying to keep others from becoming statistics? Not attacking you, she insisted, but the fire in her tone was dimming. I'm attacking the lie, the myth, the Chuck Norris caricature. You've spent decades telling young men that strength means silence, that pain is weakness, that fists solve everything. And now I'm here, he said, stepping closer, trying to rewrite that, trying to say, I got it wrong, I believed those things, I taught those things, but I've seen the consequences. Joy, firsthand. I've buried students, I've lost friends to suicide. I've sat across from men who thought crying made them less of a man, and I'm trying to change it. Joy swallowed hard. I didn't know that. You didn't ask. That silence was colder than anything they'd shared before. And then, from the corner of the stage, Whoopi's voice finally cracked through the ice. You two are the reason people stopped watching daytime TV, and why they're all watching. Again now, it broke the tension just enough for Sarah N. to exhale audibly. The cameras were still rolling. Chuck turned slightly, addressing the audience both in the studio and through the lens. I'm not perfect, he said, voice trembling. Slightly. I'm not a saint. I've made a career out of being the man who hits back. But in real life, I want to be the man who listens, who shows up, who says, you matter. He glanced back at Joy. I'm sorry if my past made people feel small. That was never the intent. But I can't undo what's been done. I can only ask, all of you let me be better. Let us be better. Joy's lip quivered. Not visibly, but those who knew her, the producers, the longtime fans, the micro-dash expression, a crack. The first real one. She turned to him, her voice shaky. You really believe you can change that? Chuck nodded. I believe we all can. Then, quietly, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. A young man in uniform. Smiling bronze star pinned to his chest. This is Ben, Chuck said. 24, Marine, suffered from PTSD. Tried 3 times to get a bed at a VA facility. On the 4th try, he succeeded. But he didn't survive. Gasps from the audience. Joy's face paled. He was my student. I taught him to fight. But I never taught him how to grieve, and I will never stop regretting that. He held the photo out, not toward Joy, toward the camera. This, Chuck said, voice trembling, is who I'm here for. Joy stepped forward. She looked at the photograph, and she finally said something without venom. I'm sorry. Chuck didn't answer. He just nodded, and the studio after, what felt like eternity, breathed. Tears were visible in the eyes of multiple audience members. A man in the front row stood up and saluted. A woman wiped her eyes with a napkin. Sarah N. leaned forward into her. Mike, voice soft, we're going to take a moment, and when we come back, we'll talk about Chuck's latest Veterans Initiative Fighting Forward, which provides mental health support, housing assistance, and trauma recovery programs for returning soldiers. Real support, not just headlines. Joy looked at Chuck again, and in a moment that defied every expectation set by the first 3 parts of this collision, she extended her hand. He stared at it, then took it. The audience rose to their feet, not in an explosion of noise, but in solidarity, in grief, in resolution. The lights above dimmed slightly, framing them both not as combatants, but as humans flawed, emotional, misunderstood, and just before the broadcast cut to commercial, Chuck looked directly into the camera one last time. If you believe in second chances, if you believe people can change, if you believe that real strength isn't how hard you hit, but how deeply you care, then share this. Like it, pass it on. Because someone out there might need to hear it more than you think. He smiled, soft, earnest, without ego. And maybe, just maybe, we stop tearing each other down long enough to lift someone up.